So I'm really pleased at what you presented here. Not sure if there are any other questions, but a couple questions I had. Well, story Jonathan, right? Wonderful, beautiful story. And it's a story of equity. You know, here it is, obviously inclusion, but equity as well. You had to do something different. And to make the class where all students may not be have the same equal abilities. And so that's where equity comes in, because you want to provide whatever resource, extra resources, whatever resources you need to bring them up, to elevate those students and not allow them to lag behind, right? And so I really appreciated that story. Going back to something you said earlier, and this is a question, not a comment, but I do some, in my training, I have this particular exercise where I get ethnicities and cultures into groups, and I'll ask people to give me the positives of your culture and give me the negatives. And so I call it an exercise of embrace and protest. What do you embrace about your culture? What do you protest about your culture? What are the things you like, dislike? And inevitably, I've done this around the country, and I always find that Anglos, which some people will call whites, have a very difficult time with this exercise. And you had touched on learning about your culture. What do you recommend for Anglos in particular to understand their culture, because they see themselves as American, but we all came from somewhere, right? None of us, unless we're natives, we're originally here. So what would you recommend for Anglos in particular to learn about their own culture?
Those are great questions, Yeathus. Thank you for that. So to answer your first question, what do I love about my culture and where I come from is the diversity I already have in my culture, my ancestors, when you really look at it, right? And I've got both my grandparents from my mom's and my dad's side are immigrants that came from other countries, from Scotland and from Italy. And so knowing that culture, and what I love about that is that we've got such a wide angle connection to other parts of the world. And there's that diversity already, even though it could be more diverse in our family as a whole. We've got a very large family that come from that started off with two sets of parents from different locations. And there's so much experience there between things like that may seem little, but to me it's big because I love food, is the food diversity, the amazing types of food I've learned from those different areas. And so that's just some of the things, the conversations and the storytelling that happen throughout our family. Just that alone right there helps a ton. The cons, just like I believe any culture has, is the stereotypes that come sometimes from generational change. Because as my grandparents were immigrants, they'd come over, but interestingly enough, because of how they were treated, they felt that those cultures, they thought them as a negative light. So the cons, and I think this might be cross-cultural, the cons though for my culture is that, and there's a lot of closed-mindedness overall in white people and in Anglos. There just is, because of what we've been taught and ingrained to believe. And so that brings me to the next question. What do I encourage people to do that look like me? And that's this. Find out what your culture is. Dig deep. Because like you said, unless you are 100% Native American, you're not American. That's science. That's not me talking here. Okay, so I don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings, but that's reality. So why not find out what that is? Today, in this day and age, you can go out to Ancestry.com and find this stuff out. Just go out there. And the question is, I'll ask anyone out there that says, well, I don't really want to do that. The question then is, well, why? What are you afraid of finding out? I'll promise you that what you find is you find such a diverse culture that you can now learn. So once you have that report, that information, now you can say, well, I didn't know this. Let me study that culture. Now you begin to understand something different than you, even though it's a part of your culture. You don't understand it. So that is my opinion is that's the way to start doing that. Begin to educate yourself. Does that help answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. Really appreciate that.
You bet.
Another question I had was, you mentioned the feeling of uncomfortableness could reveal some unconscious bias. I thought that was brilliant. For teachers and educators, many feel uncomfortable around this conversation. How do you, there's there's just so much happening in our society, right? With cancel culture and, all types of, all the racial stuff that we've had to deal with since, for me as an African-American all my life, but bringing it to the forefront to this extent at the level in which it has been, you've got this push and then you've got this pull, and we're in some ways colliding. When it comes to this being uncomfortable, especially someone who's more conservative in class, a teacher, an educator that's more conservative and feeling like, this is all PC, this is a fad. What would your words of wisdom be, for those individuals who are feeling like there's a tidal wave that's coming that upon them, and it's just this uneasiness about it? What would you recommend? How do they navigate this tide, if you will, from their perception?
Mm-hmm. That's a big question, right? I think a lot of us suffer that question, especially those that don't really have that experience, the experiences that of people that aren't like us. But I want to, right off the bat, what I'm going to say here is very clear, is that diversity and inclusion has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with people. It has everything to do with humans. It has everything to do with the fact that everybody has the same rights as you do, to be respected, to be valued, to understand. See, we all have it. That's not politics. That's humanity. So let's get the politics out of the way. So that has nothing to do, whether you're conservative or not. It's not about that. It's about people. Everyone has a right to make their own choices, number one, in America. Right? We have that privilege here, which means if they have the right to make their own choices, we are under obligation to respect those choices. Whether we agree with them or not, we are under obligation to respect that as a human. Okay? Don't have to agree, to respect it. So that being said, if you look at it from the perspective of being human, with no agenda, just being human, what we've seen now, and even not just I can list them off, right? The current racial challenges going on for rightful reasons. We have the right, whether you agree with abortion or not, there's that, the LGBTQ plus awareness, all of those things, okay? These have just been suppressed. They've always been there, these issues. These aren't new. This isn't a fad. We have in law, put in law over 60 years ago about equality, and we're still having this conversation. That means that this has been inside a volcano, just boiling and ready to erupt. It's always been there for years and centuries. We have to address it because it's about humans, it's about people. We just separate that from our political view. So I know that was a little bit long-winded, but I hope that helps answer at least my view. Again, these are my opinions and my views on this. But there's things I've had to make adjustments on too.
Yeah.
Over the years, I've said, man, I don't know how I ever believed and felt that way.
Mm-hmm.
And what helped me wake up to some of those things are major events in history and having the right people around me to give me a different perspective.
Sure.
So I would encourage everyone just to step out of the sleeping bag, look at it from a different perspective. Not saying you have to agree, but look at it from a human perspective. Mm-hmm. It's okay to be uncomfortable. There's nothing wrong with being uncomfortable. Discomfort brings growth if you allow it to, and change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Thank you, Lou. Wow.
You're welcome.
Wow, yeah. That's great. Any other questions? And Lou, let me ask one last question.
Yeah,
I hear this quite a bit as well.
Sure.
And I just love your perspective, getting a different perspective on things. You know, I do all this training, but hearing it from someone like yourself, whom I highly respect, is very refreshing.
I agree with you.
Yeah, there are people who, particularly in education, that are afraid to speak up. Again, they're uncomfortable. What would you say? What would you recommend for them? Just people are afraid to ask questions. You talk about curiosity as one of the traits of an inclusive leader, but asking questions. And I have a particular perspective on that. But you know, and I heard you mention like you know, making, you know, just asking the right questions. But sometimes people get hung up on being afraid to not ask the right question. So they don't ask the question at all.
Yeah, sure.
And when I was in the military, they used to say the only dumb question was, you know, a wrong question, but they say dumb question was the question not asked. And so, and I don't want to go beyond that. I might say more.
I know you're going with that one.
Yeah, I don't want to go beyond that, what they used to say in the military. But yeah, can you answer that? You know, about people are being afraid to ask questions, to really lean into this space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're right. You know, not asking questions leads to ignorance. That's what it is. Okay, so asking questions and say, well, I don't know what the right question is. Well, that's why you circle yourself with people that you trust. And always, my opinion is about approach. You know, it's about if you're truly wanting to know something. Let's just take race as an example, since it's a hot topic. You notice I just jump into hot topics all the time, so forgive me, but I do that. But it's important. We need to discuss these things. And as educators, we are leaders in this world. People look up to us, and it's up to us and our responsibility to have these conversations. You don't have to necessarily be the one that goes out and down on the street picketing. You don't have to do that, but you can support in other ways and to have those discussions in other ways. But to get back to your question, it's about the approach, in my opinion. And you correct me what you think too. I'd love to hear your viewpoint on this. This is about the approach. You know, my friend Ed is an example, right? I said, you know, Ed, I don't really know how to ask this question because it's a race question, and I don't want to offend you, but I really want to know this, and if this is right to say or good to say, or what's your viewpoint on it? The approach is really what it comes down to, in my opinion. From my perspective, me going to somebody like that and say, listen, I even asked him, how should I approach it? He goes, well, just ask me. He goes, but ask me with the intent of knowing and learning and doing it in a respectful way, and I'll be more than happy to answer those questions. I said, well, that's a human. That is a human. If somebody, it is as if Yeathus, you wanted to come and find out, like you asked me questions today, you want to ask a question about what it's like or certain things, that stereotypes or ideas about white people. I just want you to come to ask me. Right? We have a relationship. Now come ask me. I'll tell you, right? And vice versa. I know you will too, because we respect one another, but It's that relationship building.
Yeah.
So it's about the approach, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I agree with you, Lou. I mean, I always say, I ask those questions through leaning in the posture of love.
Yes.
And, you know, and I say this, you know, often, repeatedly, that you have animals that don't speak English. They might understand commands and certain things, but they don't really communicate in English, but yet they know if they're loved or not, right? So beings know when they're loved, especially human beings. They know and when we talk about love, we're talking about respect, we're talking about dignity, right? We're talking about being valued, sensing a belonging. So I have the same approach, same approach. Now let me just add to that question. What if you're in the classroom, a hot topic comes up, you don't have an ed that you can go to now as a teacher, you know? So, and you have this hot topic, I'm thinking, and help me out here, Lou. You've been a teacher. I'm thinking I have two options here. One, I can say, hey, class, let me get back to you on this topic, and then I'm gonna. And this is where leadership comes in. You talk about leadership. Your definition, leadership is often people of influence, right? It's about influence, but there are a lot of leaders who are just positional leaders, and they're not stepping up to the plate on these issues. So we need to have leaders who are really leaning into this, stepping up, and truly providing guidance. So as a teacher in the classroom, I have an option. I can go to my leader, help me, and the kids on the edge, they'll come back because I'm promising them we're going to have this conversation.
That's right.
Or I can flip it, opposed to giving my opinions, which a lot of teachers don't feel comfortable with. I could begin asking questions to the students. But still, teachers might be afraid because even asking the questions could be, and for lack of a better term, opening Pandora's box for them.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So just give a little wisdom with a couple minutes we have, a little wisdom on what would be your approach on something where it's a hot topic and asking those questions and so forth.
Well, I always come from the adage that hot topics should never be fully avoided. Because hot topics fully avoided end up becoming volcanoes. We've seen that over the last year and a half.
Yeah.
So they should never be avoided. However, in the school system, another challenge that we face with diversity and inclusion a lot of times is the certain standards and legalities behind certain things that educators are allowed to do and what not to do, right?
Yeah.
So we have to understand that too, and I fully feel that. Because we don't want to be a protester, we want to be an educator. And so we want to educate the students, but we also will say, well, we know that there's a boundary. Sometimes we don't know what that boundary might be. So put that in your mind, and let's think, so always consider that piece first. What is the current boundary here? So if there's an open conversation, most students like, I don't understand why this police officer killed this black man, or why in this country women are treated a certain way. All those things may come up. Now it's a matter of, okay, how do I approach these things? As a teacher, I'm going to give you two sides to this. As an instructor, as a teacher, as an educator, I want to educate students. I want to teach them something that they'll take away. The best way to teach anybody is to have them figure it out themselves sometimes. So as an educator, boundaries aside, that is an amazing question. I tell you what you do. I would like for you all to go back, research that topic, give them something specific so it's not so broad, find out about this, and then write your summary of what you feel about this. You can talk about that in class and as a group. That's called inclusive leadership, right? Now, there are certain boundaries, right? So there are some things that have to be careful, and if all else fails, you're like, I really want to do this, but I'm not sure if I can. Obviously, let students know, hey, you know what? That's a great thing. Let's go ahead and talk about that again tomorrow. I'm going to check on a couple of things and see if we can start a conversation on this. Go to your leader and say, hey, listen, this is what's come up. I really want to approach it this way because I think they'll learn from it. Plead your case a little bit, because now you're championing the inclusive and culture in your classroom, but also wanting to get the feedback from your leader. Okay. So those are the two ways I would approach that, depending on the culture of your school district, and what those boundaries look like. Okay. I know it sounds like a safe answer, but because I'm not a safe person, I'd much rather address it, have a great conversation over and give them an assignment. We'll talk about it, right? But again, there's those strange boundaries that I still believe we have to overcome and